Good morning. Javier Becerra, Chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, joined by our Vice Chairman, Joe Crowley, and the ranking Democrat on the on the Education Committee, Education and Workforce Committee, Congressman Bobby Scott from Virginia. We're pleased that he's joined us today. We're going to let him talk about a very important bill that will be up on the floor. Unfortunately, important in many respects. One, because it doesn't do justice for our kids, but we'll get to that in a second. I wanted to first start off by saying Happy Fourth to so many people. We always should take the time to celebrate what is the strongest and most successful democracy the world has ever known. And when you see around the world how there's calamity and difficult problems, it sure is nice to know that while we still have our difficult and frustrating times, we still find ways to move forward. And when we heard that last month more than 200,000 Americans, actually more than 230,000 Americans went back to work, and you string that together with over 60 months of continued job growth in this country, you can see how we're doing something right compared to other countries. We know we can do more. And we thank the president for working hard to make sure that we do a little bit more. So all those Americans who are going back to work, many are finding that their pay is increasing because the president is lifting the minimum wage. The president is making sure that people who work long hours and deserve overtime pay begin to get it. The president is trying to push Congress to finally do a highway transportation bill so we can get money back to communities, so we can build those roads, repair those bridges, make our infrastructure work so we can get to work on time. And so we see that progress moving. And then in the last couple of weeks, we saw the Supreme Court help as well. The Supreme Court made sure that millions of Americans throughout this country can continue to hold on to their health insurance that they got as a result of the Affordable Care Act, and they don't have to worry about, once again, will I be able to take my child to the doctor or not because I can't afford it? Well, fortunately, the Supreme Court moved in the right direction and upheld the Affordable Care Act, and today millions of American families can continue to have that insurance that lets them take their children to that doctor or to that hospital. We're also pleased that the Supreme Court said we're moving forward. This is the 21st century. If you love someone, you should have the right to marry that person, regardless of your gender. And we're thrilled that we saw the president working hard. We saw the Supreme Court finally move in the right direction. The one missing piece seems to be Congress. For some reason, our Republican leadership here in the House and in the Senate seems to be in this permanent funk where they find it very difficult to move forward, to get things done. And we find that Congress is spectating as the president is working, as the Supreme Court is acting. Congress is spectating. We seem to be stuck here in Congress in a permanent moonwalk where very little gets done. And we're going to hear about a bill that's important to all of our families who have kids, and how progress on moving forward for all children, including children who are disadvantaged, may be put in jeopardy by the bill that the House is going to have on its floor this week. That is a partisan bill, not a bipartisan bill. This backsliding has to stop. If the president is moving forward with the private sector to create jobs, if the Supreme Court is finally moving in a direction that really understands the American people's priorities, then Congress should join in rather than backslide and try to go back to yesteryears when things weren't so good. We should be trying to move forward. This is the 21st century. And my final thought here is it's unfortunate that Congress can't get it, that it's stuck in this funk. We have a chance to do some great things. And this backsliding seems to be so similar to what we're hearing now coming out of Iran, where Iran is beginning to backslide on its commitments to finally have a deal worked out with the world where we can ensure that all peoples of this globe will be safe from nuclear weapons. And it's becoming very troubling to watch as Iran's leadership is backsliding from the commitments made earlier, and that does not bode well for an agreement. So we would urge the Iranian leadership not to play games, to move forward, because this is a chance for us to get some big things done. And so whether it's Congress backsliding or the Iranian leadership backsliding, it doesn't make sense and it doesn't do good. And so we should try to move forward, get some things done. With that, let me yield to the Vice Chairman, Joe Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I know you welcomed everyone back from the 4th of July recess. But the one thing, and I often don't do this, Mr. Chairman, is you neglected to mention the World Championship of the women's soccer team, and I just want to remind us all that number one, we're number one in women's soccer in the world, and we recognize the investment that each of those women made and the team made to make themselves the number one soccer team in the world. The hard work, the training, and the vision that they had to be number one. All too often I get the sense the Republican leadership of the House, their vision chant is, let's be number two again. Ask the Japanese soccer team, women's soccer team, how they feel about being number two right now. Being number one feels a lot better. And I think maybe my Republican colleagues need to take a page out of the women's soccer team. It certainly is not happening today. And Bobby Scott will talk about the education bill, because that, again, once again, is going backwards and not forward, not promoting the best that we can be in America, not promoting a vision of being number one. It really is backsliding, and I'll let Bobby talk more about that. I am excited to be back, though, here in Washington to get things done. I often talk about the lack of vision, demonstrated again in the education bill we'll talk about. It's also demonstrated in the appropriations bill that we have before us again here, and the lack of commitment to our public lands and to the environment. This has to end. We need to have a broader and much larger and forward-thinking agenda and vision for America. It should begin today in the spirit of the 4th of July and what this country was founded for. Not a country for ourselves, but a country for perpetuity, for the world to look at and be inspired by. And with that, let me turn over to the ranking member of the Education and Workforce Committee, Bobby Scott.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joe and Javier. And as you mentioned, the women's soccer, you can't ignore the impact of Title IX as a civil right, which was established about 50 years ago, that enabled the young women to have that opportunity. Also, 50 years ago, the Supreme Court talked about the importance of education, that no child can reasonably be expected to succeed in life if denied the opportunity of an education, and that opportunity must be made available to all on equal terms. Unfortunately, the way we fund education, primarily through the real estate tax, virtually guarantees that there will not be those equal educational opportunities. So 50 years ago, we established the Elementary and Secondary Education Act to address the financial inequities. In subsequent reauthorizations, we also required states to assess and try to cure achievement gaps, with some groups way behind other groups in achievement, assess to find out where the achievement gaps are and do something about it. We have made significant progress in education because of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. We are in the process of reauthorizing that, and unfortunately, the H.R. 5, which we'll be considering today, takes a step in the right direction. First, instead of helping to deal with inequities in funding, it actually takes money from low-income areas to give to wealthy areas. Takes money from low-income areas where it's most needed and give to wealthy areas. Los Angeles, for example, 70% poverty, will lose under their formula about a quarter of its funding. Beverly Hills, with virtually no poverty, will pick up another 20 or 30% in funding. That's going in the wrong direction. Furthermore, in terms of the achievement gap, there will be provisions in the bill that scale back the ability to ascertain whether or not there's an achievement gap, scale back in assessments. And then after, if you do discover an achievement gap, it doesn't require you to do anything about it. These are steps in the wrong direction. We need to strengthen the assessments and strengthen the response to achievement gaps and make sure that the money flows where it's most needed. When the bill came up before, there was virtually no support in the Democratic Party for the ES to H.R. 5, and hopefully they'll be in the same situation today.
We'll take questions.
Mr. Becerra, you talked about Iran backsliding. What are you hearing in the caucus about members getting jittery about this Iran deal? Many were very supportive of the president pursuing an agreement, and it seems now that some people, especially on your side of the aisle, are getting to be more they do have an agreement and it comes to a resolution of approval or disapproval here on the bill?
I'd say it's the way to describe it is more frustration that we continue to hear from the Iranian side that they seem to be wanting to reopen what we thought were closed aspects of this negotiation. Most members, I would say, on the Democratic side are still optimistic that we can reach a good agreement. But this is life or death. You're talking nuclear weapons. You don't play lightly with this, and none of us will know until we get to read any agreement, if it's reached, what it actually says. But certainly the news that we're hearing of backsliding by the Iranians doesn't bode well for gaining support here in the U.S. and certainly not in Congress. So most of us would hope that a deal could be concluded, that it would be a good deal once we've had a chance to read it, and we could support it so we can safeguard not just Americans, but people throughout the world who want to be free of nuclear weapons. But until we get to read it, it's going to be unclear what it says. I think most members are hopeful. But, again, every time you keep hearing this backsliding, it makes it tough to be hopeful.
A couple of years ago, the president had used the term a red line in terms of Syria. Do you see, because there has been support for the effort, that what is the red line for Democrats who've been supportive of him, and do you see a scenario where maybe the administration wants to go forward, and you say there's concern in the caucus, this playing out like the trade deal, where he wants something, and then the Democrats here on the Hill aren't as supportive?
I'll certainly let my colleagues respond as well, because I think this is one of those issues where it's really a conscious vote, how you feel about this, because it is about life and death, about major activities that could affect humankind. I have to wait to see what the agreement says, because this is not an issue of trust, that I trust that the Iranians will do the right thing, or I trust that people will negotiate on all sides a good deal that I think I can vote for. This is like a vote on war for me, in the sense that I, at the end of the day, have to make that decision. So I'm not going to trust that there will be a good deal. I'm going to want to read it to decide if it's a good enough deal to get my vote. But I certainly do believe that the president is going to work as hard as he can to get a good deal. And if we can stick to the elements of what was part of the negotiation, there are the fruits for a good deal. It's just whether or not the Iranians will stick to that bargain and stop backsliding. And that's what I think all of us are going to wait to see. So there's not an issue of trust here. It's making sure that this is a good deal. Only after reading it can we tell if it's going to be a good deal. And I still believe that most people are optimistic that the president can help us with our P5 partners, our P5+1 partners. We can get there on a good deal, but the proof is in the pudding. I don't know if Joe or
I would just follow up and just say that I think Javier is correct, and the chairman is correct in that we're not negotiating this deal. That's the White House. We're responding to what we're reading in the newspapers, when asked. At the end of the day, Javier is right. It appears that we'll have 60 days now to review any deal that is made, and I think every member of Congress, both Democrat and Republicans, will give it its due diligence because of the importance of this vote.
Any other questions?
Did you not mention the ticker tape parade in New York City for a question on that for the women's soccer team? Is that what you want to ask me? Oh, sorry.
You mean the one that's coming after the one we did in L.A.?
Oh, well, the more important, more meaningful one, Javier, is what I was talking about.
The coasts are covered. Sir.
On these sanctuary laws, you saw the headlines last week and this issue in San Francisco. Do you think that there's any need to revisit those laws in the wake of that tragedy? Heard hearings from Senators Boxer and Feinstein that they want more cooperation between local authorities and federal immigration laws.
My understanding of the situation that occurred, the tragic situation that occurred in the Bay Area with the killing of an American by an immigrant who was undocumented, was that this individual had a record, was someone that we had a right to detain, and someone dropped the ball. I'm not sure who dropped the ball because I don't know all the specifics. But this is a case where it appears that someone dropped the ball. I don't believe having a sanctuary designation stops us from following the due course of the law to arrest or detain or to deport an individual who doesn't have a right to be in the country. And so I don't believe we should be trying to ascribe blame based on a designation as a sanctuary city. I think what you have to do is get to the bottom of what happened, that this individual who, the suspect who committed the, who allegedly committed the crime, and we obviously a lot of evidence and witnesses to this, that we figure out what happened where this individual was released rather than detained. And so I think those facts have to come out so we can decide what the heck happened. But it is a tragic situation, and no one should have to go through this. And that's why those authorities all have to come before the red carpet and answer those questions.
Do you think Congress has any role to play to ensure that those communications are taking place? You're right, there seems like there was a lot of miscommunication there.
Congress has a huge role to play. The first and foremost thing we can do is finally fix these broken immigration laws so we can get past this kind of stuff, so that local jurisdictions know how they operate when it comes to immigration, which is a federal issue, and that the immigration services, our law enforcement personnel within immigration, know how to operate. It is crazy to continue to keep your eyes closed to the fact that there's close to 10 or 11 million people in this country who go to work virtually every day or go to school without the documents that they've lacked for years and years. Yet many of them are paying taxes and, as I said, working, owning homes, having businesses. Many, as this individual we saw that apparently committed this crime, who should be deported. And this is what happens when you have a broken immigration system. And so absolutely Congress has a role here. Get to work. Get something done. As I said before, we've been backsliding here in Congress. Not we. Those in the leadership, I should make it very clear. Many of us have been ready to do immigration reform for a long time. But those who aren't here in Congress ready to get to work, whether it's immigration reform, job creation, transportation legislation to get our roads and bridges fixed, it's time to act. It's time to get to work. And not least of which means get to work on fixing our broken immigration system so we don't have situations like this in San Francisco occur to anyone.
Let me just respond. The sanctuary cities, or the so-called sanctuary cities, have these laws in place to help law enforcement solve crimes. They're not there to cover up or to enable those crimes to happen. I will just point out this weekend here in our nation's capital, an individual had been arrested last week, was released on Friday, and committed a vicious murder on the metro. You know, if you ask the victim's family, you know, a citizen or non-citizen committing murder, it's still murder. It's a vicious crime. I think Javier is correct. The best way to address this overall is to have comprehensive immigration reform. But short of that, if an individual is committing a crime and they're not documented, and they're found to be in violation of a felony, certainly have no right to stay in this country at all. I don't think anyone argues with that. But the overall answer and simple answer is comprehensive immigration reform.
Did you want to chime in on it? Yes.
Did hear you mention in that list of things that need to be done, anything on gun control. Just wondered if you saw any progress on including background checks or other gun legislation. I think Van Hollen has a bill.
For those of us who had an opportunity to join the president in Charleston a little bit more than a week ago, how can you not talk about gun safety legislation? How can you not talk about what we need to do to address those who are getting access to weapons when they should never have access to them? You know, that's some of the worst backsliding we've seen in Congress, the inability of this Congress to help local jurisdictions, our communities, do what they need to do to have safety for their people. And common sense gun safety legislation, background checks so that we know who's trying to purchase weapons, simple stuff that the majority of Americans, the majority of gun owners support. Absolutely. But can we get something like that done in this Congress? No. As I said, this Congress seems to be in a major funk when it comes to getting things done that the American people want to happen. And it's unfortunate because whether it's Charleston or whether it's the victims of these homicides in the Bay Area, we all lose. And so it's time to get our work done.